How do you debug Docker containers and versus code? If you are working with Docker containers and want to debug your applications using Visual Studio Code, you are in the right place. Let's break down the steps to make your debugging process smooth and effective. First, you need to ensure that Docker is installed and running on your machine. This is essential because Visual Studio Code will rely on Docker to manage your containers. Next, you will want to install the Container Tools extension in Visual Studio Code. This extension is key for debugging applications built with Node.js, Python, and Net inside containers. Once you have your environment set up, you need to prepare your application and Docker files. Your project should include a Dockerfile, which tells Docker how to build your container image. You will also create tasks in a file called tasks.json. These tasks will help automate the process of building and running your container in debug mode. If you do not have these files, you can use Visual Studio Code commands like containers. Add Docker files to Workspace to generate them. Next, you will configure debugging in a file called launch.json. In this file, you will define a debug configuration and specify the type as Docker. This configuration will include the platform you are using, whether it is Node.js, Python, or Net, and the request type, which can be either launch or attach. For example, if you are using Node.js, you will set the platform to Node and include a pre-launch task like Docker run, debug. Now, let's talk about adjusting container entry points and ports. Depending on the application you are debugging, you may need to modify the container's entry point or command line arguments in tasks.json. It is also important to expose the necessary ports in your Dockerfile and in the Docker run command. For instance, if you are using Python, you might expose port 56784 for debugging. For Net applications, you may need to expose ports 5000 and 5001 for secure connections. Once everything is set up, you can use the Visual Studio Code debugger interface. You can set breakpoints in your source code and start debugging using the launch configuration you created. Visual Studio Code will build the container, run it with debugging enabled, and attach the debugger to the running process inside the container. This allows you to step through your code, inspect variables, and evaluate expressions just like you would in a local debugging session. For an even more integrated experience, consider using the Remote Containers extension. This allows you to open your project directly inside a containerized development environment, making it easier to develop and debug seamlessly. Remember, simply adding a launch configuration is not enough. You must ensure that the build and run tasks are properly configured to support debugging. Multi-stage Docker builds can help separate the debug environment from production, only including debugging tools in the debug stage. By following these steps, you can effectively debug applications running inside Docker containers directly from Visual Studio Code. This approach helps streamline your troubleshooting process and integrates container debugging into your regular development workflow.